Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining and welcome to the Product People Community live stream. Before we start, a quick reminder our events are streamed on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitch. All talks are recorded and saved on YouTube, so feel free to check out any sessions you might have missed. Also, you can ask your questions and participate in polls anytime via Slido. Just go to slido.com and enter the code 2806285 or just basically scan the QR code on the screen. I'm giving you a couple of seconds to scan the QR code and then I will change the slide. Okay. Today we are diving into a super interesting topic, how games do retention better than SaaS. And it will be presented to us by Adriana Fosca, who is a product management consultant at Product People. Yes. And before we dive in, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Ahmed, and I am an associate product management consultant at Product People and your host today. I have a background in computer science and software engineering. I have been working on product management and business analysis mainly across both B2B and B2C products, including companies like Insider and Bubble. And for those of you who don't know us yet, let me give you a quick overview of what we do at Product People. We are a product management consultancy and we mainly support companies with interim product management, product operations, and transformation acceleration. So essentially, we help teams discover and deliver better products faster. At the same time, we also give back to the community by organizing free events like this one for one of the Europe's largest product communities with more than 60,000 members. Before I hand it over to our speaker, we would love to hear from you. Please go to Slido link and answer this question. What makes you drop a product the fastest? A. Confusing onboarding. B. Too many steps to get started. C. No immediate value. Or D. It just feels boring. You can answer now via Slido by quickly scanning the QR code or going to slido.com and entering the code again 2806285. We will give you a few seconds to answer. Also, while waiting, it is interesting how these options look simple on the surface, but they all point to the same underlying problem, right? People leave when they don't feel value fast enough. Whether it is confusing onboarding, or too many steps, or just something feeling boring, it usually comes down to one thing: why should I stay here? And I think what is especially interesting is that most products don't lose users because they are bad, but because they are not engaging enough and early enough. And this is exactly where gaming companies are incredibly strong, I think. They are masters at creating that early hook. So I'm really curious to see which option comes out on top here. And we have a we have a oh two we have two winners. So option B and option C both has 50%. Well, I can't disagree. Then let me change the slide. And yes, so without further ado, I am happy to welcome Adriana Fosca. Adri brings over 5 years of experience in product management with a strong background in also in change management and compliance. She has worked across both B2B and B2C environments, including enterprise SaaS, health tech, legal tech, and even marketplace products. Throughout her work, she has been involved in everything from product strategy and discovery to delivery, onboarding, and retention focused initiatives. Thank you for joining us today, Adri. I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on today's topic. And over to you.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. I am always excited to talk about games. So, this is really just an excuse for me to talk about games, truly. Anyways, thank you all for joining us today. As Ahmed was already revealing, the topic of this talk is experiences that gaming developing companies have mastered and do retention much, much better than your SaaS tool. All right. So first of all, you should be asking yourself, why is that I am entitled to talk about these? So I would like to introduce myself with my credentials. I am very seriously qualified to talk about this. I have very real experience. So first of all, I have over 3,000 hours accumulated of playing World of Warcraft, exclusively playing the Horde. That, if you run the numbers, is equivalent to 120 full days or have an online failed master's in law. And I'm a lawyer, so I should have done that, maybe. I also have managed the Rise of Kingdom servers for 5 years, and I have been able to ship more cross-cultural conflict resolutions there than in any sprint read-through so far in my life. I have learned more about user retention from login streak rewards than articles, and I also happen to meet my husband in a mobile game. So for that, I have 100% on lead conversion rate, and for retention, I guess we need to revisit this in 5 more years. So you see, I have very vast experience to talk about this and to try to answer the question of why games deserve a seat at the PM table. They are not just for ADHD people seeking dopamine like me. So first of all, you should be aware, in case you don't know this, that the global gaming industry is far bigger than the movie and music industries combined. This is from Statista, and the expected revenue for SaaS last year globally was around $390 billion, and for gaming it became around $403 billion in 2025. So, in case you didn't know, you weren't familiar, gaming brings a lot of money in. Why? Well, games are the gold UX standard. You see, because if people like me get bored or confused for the very first 10 seconds, we will just leave. We will just hit uninstall and we will remove the game from our PCs, our tablets, or our Nintendo Switch. Now, be mindful, I said gold standard in UX and not UI because I wanted to show you an example. Look at this. Does any of this make sense to you? It doesn't really, unless you have been playing World of Warcraft for 10 years. This makes absolutely no sense, and it's quite confusing for someone that has never seen it. So great UX, probably not great UI, but there is a difference. Games are masters at engagement loops. Mobile games boast a retention rate of 30 to 40% on day one, and on day 30, they're managed to hit even 5 or 10%. You see, in mobile games especially, I think there are a very particularly interesting case because monetization here is ruthlessly optimized. I don't know if anyone in the audience has ever heard of a Chinese company that is now Singapore-based that's called Hoyoverse, or previously known as MiHoYo. Hoyoverse belongs in the industry of gacha mobile gaming, which is a genre on its own. And their flagship game is called Genshin Impact, and it launched around, I believe, maybe 5 years ago. Genshin Impact made around $1 billion in under 6 months from being launched, primarily just through the gacha systems. In case this terminology of gacha is brand new for you, I'll give you a very brief explanation. Gacha is just betting. It's exactly that. People use real life money to wish or pull for characters that are during a limited phase available in the game. Characters, weapons, skins, aspects, you name it. Therefore, just through this system, they managed to make $1 billion. Fortnite, on the other hand, which I also think it's a household staple, made around $9 billion just selling cosmetics. Again, cosmetics are just pixels that make your character look pretty. So what are games doing right that we could possibly translate to product management, and especially in B2B? I have collected a bunch of things that I have learned, but also from my favorite books to build delightful engagement experiences for users. And I think we could summarize this in 5 items. The first is that games have, and make sure they do, have fast, frictionless onboarding. Again, the window for a game developer company to be able to secure the attention span of a gamer is very short. That means that gaming companies have to ensure that they give you the necessary amount of information to hook you into playing more hours in the game within the first 10 to 15 minutes of installing the game. The second is deep emotional retention. They use emotional arguments, emotional hooks to characters, stories for the players to keep coming back. They achieve habit loop formation, and they build reward systems. They also build upon character identity and investment of the players in the player identity. And finally, have clear, satisfying progression. The best games, I believe, will teach users or gamers absolutely everything while they're having fun. And on the other hand, most SaaS tools will teach you absolutely nothing while you're trying to find the frequently asked questions within 12 tabs. So let's break these down. I have a quick example for each one of the statements that I just shared with you. So hopefully some of these ring familiar. And if they do, I would love to hear from you in the comments. First of all, fast and frictionless onboarding. This is one of my favorite games, Wild Rift by Riot Games. Wild Rift is the smaller sibling to League of Legends in PC, worldwide phenomenon. The thing is, Wild Rift is a mobile game. Mobile games have an even shorter attention span, and they are so easy to delete that the developers have to truly make sure that the onboarding is just as engaging as the actual gameplay. So the first time user experience for Wild Rift is already the actual gameplay itself. The tutorial runs players through real-life scenarios of the game in the real-life map that they will be using. It breaks down one concept at a time, so in a slow, dripping kind of a way that is not overwhelming. First, they teach you movement, then they teach you abilities, then they teach you how to last hit one of the enemy minions in order to gain gold. It then slowly opens and unlocks more complexity. The game obviously is optimized for mobile gadgets, which means it's ideal for a phone screen or a tablet or an iPad. It's very tactile and therefore very intuitive mechanically. It successfully avoids cognitive overload for players that are simply not familiar with the League of Legends version on a PC with a keyboard. I think the key pro takeaway from the fast and frictionless onboarding in Wild Rift would be that effective onboarding will always introduce core actions in the order of the operations users need them. That's why it feels so organic. That's why it feels so natural. Not in feature release order. It lets the users play and enjoy very early on. That way, the learning curve feels absolutely served, absolutely earned, and not overwhelming. There are two important things here that, in case you are curious about how fast and frictionless onboarding translates from a psychological perspective and theoretical perspective, I would recommend checking. One of them is the cognitive load theory, which supports the introduction of complexity gradually to increase retention in the person that is learning the new thing. And the second would be the fog behavior model, which removes friction to create action, especially in early moments. Quick screenshot of how the UI used to look like when the first time Wild Rift was released to the market. This was the basic tutorial. It would continue to unlock rewards, and you would get fully rewarded with a champion and a skin by the end of the completion of the tutorial. Second is deep emotional retention. And my favorite game of the whole wide world for this would be, I believe, World of Warcraft or your MMM of choice. In the case of World of Warcraft, it's a very, very, very old game. It's at least a 10-year-old player in the industry. And the thing is, how would a 10-year-old game with the graphics that truly belong to a 10-year-old game have gotten better in the last years, but it's still a 10-year-old game with 10-year-old gaming systems still attract such a wide number of players that represents such a chunk of Blizzard's revenue avenue? Well, the thing is, it engages you with the story of the characters, the story of the places, to the point that you feel emotionally invested as a player. So whether you are exploring the map for the very first time, you're talking to a character like Thrall, who is a staple in the WoW lore for the first time, the game makes sure that you are binded emotionally through the world building and the shared moments with not even other real life people, but the NPCs, the non-playable characters. Events like additional guild drama with other real people, or the one time that your raid wiped at 1% during the very first week of the season, will create episodic memory, which means very real memories that you would be sharing, anecdotes that you would be sharing with your friends, such as, oh, this year I was able to travel to Peru and I had such a great time in Peru exploring Machu Picchu. Well, in this case, what happens with a gamer is there are anecdotes building in-game with in-game systems. So instead of the conversation about how great your trip was last year, the conversation can be, oh, last year I was playing with my friends when the War Within came out for World of Warcraft. We tried to do this dungeon the first time, and you remember how we wiped. It was hilarious. It wasn't hilarious in that moment, but now it's hilarious looking back. So that's episodic memory. It's a very strong way to ensure that players feel invested in the game. So essentially, what happens here is emotion builds utility. So when we design for moments people will remember and retell, when we design for a delightful surprise, then what we are creating in our users is a sense of meaning, a sense of belonging to the game, or in this case, to the product. A couple of things, again, additional pebbles that you might be interested if you're very curious like me in the academics behind all of this are the narrative transportation theory that supports emotional immersion driving loyalty. Loyalty is just a funky word for retention, essentially. And the peak end rule by Kanahan, where people judge experiences based on their most intense moments at the ending. This is particularly important here, and I think it's also something that we see a lot when we're reading through community customer support tickets, right? What we want is we want users to remember our latest update, not for the amount of bugs, but probably for the satisfaction that they had when they were able to complete a process that was not available to them before the update. However, if our new patch comes out and it's incredibly buggy and it creates a lot of frustration, it's really hard that any kind of damage control that we make or we do after that is going to fully erase how intense users felt for the moment where they actually tried the feature for the first time or the release for the first time and it was very buggy. Another talk here from me would be the very first time that I played the World Within last year. One of my favorite cities in World of Warcraft was fully destroyed to the ground, demolished. This was Dalaran. It was a beloved city for almost 10 years of in-game history, and it was just destroyed. And this was the only thing people were talking about for months when the release came out. Third is habit loops and reward systems. So one thing that most of all of the games that I'm going to be sharing here do, you already saw it when I was sharing Wild Rift's onboarding system that rewards you at the end of the onboarding, at the end of the tutorial. Warcraft, that gives you weekly activities that you can complete in order to get a certain level of points, reputation, etc. is they build a system that unlocks gratification for players to continue to come back and build a habit loop, to the point that people will make sure that they're always logging into the World of Warcraft accounts once a week in order to clear the weekly content before the server reset. A really good example that is in World of Warcraft or Wild Rift for this would be Genshin Impact. And I think it's really iconic how Genshin Impact did this, because Genshin Impact, again, is flagship game of one of the largest gacha developer companies in the mobile gaming industry, Hoyoverse. So Genshin Impact has a very nifty thing called questing or dailies, essentially. So what the players do is they log in, they claim the resin. Resin is an in-game term for energy, or essentially a point system that you consume when you're doing activities. You do your daily quests, and then you pull on the character banner that's the gacha system that I was explaining earlier. This cycle repeats every day for all the players. Why? Because they need to ensure they can get the in-game currency in order to obtain the characters that they want from a limited time FOMO banner. This tight cycle of trigger action reward is layered also with time-gated mechanics to just build up more layers of fear of missing out limited events from the players. So players become trained, essentially conditioned to return, not just for the rewards, but because they're now starting to fear that they will be missing out. When we design for repeatable, rewarding actions with small, lightweight triggers like emails, in-product nudges, notifications, then we are achieving a habit loop formation. Bonus points if what we're doing is also embedding social proof when possible. What does social proof mean here? Well, essentially that someone can boast about their habit loop completion to other people. So something that Genshin Impact does quite frequently, and other games by Hoyoverse do this as well, is when you're able to obtain one of the characters during the time-limited or time-gated events, you're able to display your profile picture with the face of the character that you just obtained, which sends a very subtle, not so subtle message to everyone else that is taking a look at your profile in the game. I got that character and you didn't. Social proof. Here we have the application of the hooked model that you might have already heard of. that explains that a trigger, the action, a variable reward, all of these, the consequence of all of these is investment in the game from the user perspective. And finally, the Skinner box theory that explains that the variable ratio rewards are highly addictive. Why? Delayed gratification is not so delayed and it's actually immediate. Here, it's a screenshot of how the daily commission rewards look in Genshin Impact. If you see, there is a very large counter that says 0 out of 4, that it keeps reminding the player that there is something to be completed and that there are rewards that will be obtained from this completion. The rewards are always front and center. The rewards in this case are those cute little boxes with the icons that you can see on each one of the rows. So the players are constantly reminded that they will get, or if they don't get, they will miss out on all of this. This is the Battle Pass. A Battle Pass is a very interesting concept also of fear of missing out combined with ruthless monetization. Battle passes are basically in absolutely every single game nowadays. You can find them in League of Legends, Fortnite, World of Warcraft. Every single game has some form of battle pass. What a battle pass does is it is time locked, which it means it runs for a cycle. It's usually between 19 to 20, tops 30 days. You are able to obtain free rewards by completing missions or activities that give you points. But there is a second layer to this. As you can see here, there are 2 rows of rewards. One row is completely free, and the second row is locked behind a paywall. Players can choose to pay money and then either double the rewards that they're obtaining or obtaining rewards that are not even available on the very first free-to-play layer. The fourth, and this is probably my personal favorite for game design, is player identity and investment. And a really good example for this is actually Rise of Kingdoms. If you remember earlier on, Rise of Kingdoms is the game where I met my husband. So I think I have a very good experience on how they managed to develop player identity in Rise of Kingdoms. Rise of Kingdoms is a game developed by a Chinese company called Lilith. And it's essentially a mobile version, a socialized mobile version of Age of Empires. In this game, players choose a civilization, they build an alliance with other players, they choose a commander, and they lead armies throughout a map. There are time-gated events that require the unification of several alliances in the same server. It demands social interaction as an essential part of the gameplay. So over time, on one hand, the progress feels uniquely the players. You're building, you're contributing, you're identifying yourself with a role in the structure. The server has a hierarchy of its own. You can be a strategist, you can be a warrior, you can be a diplomat, and your kingdom, who will then compete with other servers. So perfectly achieved in this case, because absolutely every single monetary transaction that happens within Rise of Kingdoms and similar games to Rise of Kingdoms, like Clash of Clans or Call of Dragons, is that the achievement of player identity and investment is so well done. Players will just drop money for better enhancements in the game, for enhancements of their own alliance. And most of the times, these are alliances that are built between people that just simply don't know each other at all. In this case, a very big glaring conclusion is that identity builds and ensures retention. Identity is basically the glue. It helps users see themselves in the product. It can be through profiles, through customization options, through just a name tag or a naming rights, or even just having a role that's assigned to them and them only. This is also reflected in the self-determination theory that explains how autonomy and relatedness will always increase intrinsic motivation for someone to do something or keep coming to something. And the IKEA effect, where people value what they build. Basically, in Rise of Kingdoms, you build an alliance, you build a structure, you build a kingdom with other people, and you're obviously attached to what you have built. This is how it looks like in the game. All of these sprites here are different players in the same location at the same time. You're able to chat with other people in game. You're able to share messages with one another. So it's it has a very hardcore social component to it. Clear, satisfying progression. This is kind of like the ribbon to start tying and wrapping everything up. And again, I have to bring World of Warcraft here, because how else would a 10-year-old game ensure that people just keep coming back to it. World of Warcraft is truly a sandbox. People can focus on leveling, they can focus on gearing up and getting better gear with better score. They can work on reputation bars, they can work on collecting achievements, collecting mounts. World of Warcraft has a progression system for absolutely every single thing a player can do in the game, which is a lot of stuff. There is always something someone can chase in the end game. It doesn't matter if it's a mount, a transmog, which is the word for the armor and the way that it looks like, or the actual true end game for some people, which is going into dungeons and raids on a mythic level with their friends. This is what we call end game content. Users will always stay engaged when they can see a clear next step that needs or will be unlocked with their current investment and current actions. When we make this visible through the most simple UI fix, which is a progress bar, we unlock celebratory moments for milestone completions, which again, it's delightful for people to complete things. Here we have two interesting pebbles of information. One of them is the goal gradient hypothesis, where we explain how motivation will always increase the closer people see themselves to the goal. And the second is the progress principle, where through making progress visible, we will drive satisfaction at work and play. I think this is probably the most universal design principle. Always, it's very clear in SaaS, it's very clear in B2B and also B2C. When there is a progress bar, people feel that there is transparency in the process, but also people feel motivated to complete the progress bar. This is a very cute little example of how progress bar looks just for the reputation system in World of Warcraft. You have visibility of the reputations and the progress of your reputation for absolutely every single one of the groups that you interact with the game. May that be your guild with real people, or may that be groups of people and NPCs from cultures or tribes or villages in the map. So, conclusion, very quickly. What we can do is reward people early and often, even the tiny wins. We can let them see their progress, which will motivate them. We should try to reframe drudgery as missions with meaning. And most than anything, and I cannot emphasize this harder, is make our users feel clever, not clueless. Okay, to wrap up, I would like to share with you what I consider last year's masterclass and how to fumble a generational niche audience in a market from the game industry perspective. And this is the mobile gaming example of Infinity Nikki, Infold's Chinese company that develops this, Infinity Nikki, and the really big bad update. So, most of gacha games currently in the market are catered to a very specific profile and a very specific gender expression of an audience. This here, Nikki, is very much on the opposite side of the marketing. The graphics are very feminine, they're very soft. The whole point of Infinity Nikki is to collect outfit pieces and dress Nikki up. Actually, Infinity Nikki is one of the many installments in the series of Nikki, a dress up game. So Infold decided to cater to this specific market that was predominantly women or people that fancy female presenting imagery with Infinity Nikki. And Infinity Nikki was doing great, was doing amazing. It made it into the market. It had massive reception. The other game by Infold Gaming is also big, and it's called Love and Deep Space. So this was riding kind of Love and Deep Space coattails, and the impact was felt almost immediately throughout the gacha mobile gaming community. However, with their update 1.5, several things just kind of went down. And I'm going to list every single one of them and every single one of the game design principles that each one of these things violated. So the first thing that this update did was, during the anniversary, Infold decided to change Steam rewards for the players. So players were promised an X amount of in-game currency if an X amount of free registrations or registrations were going to be achieved with the release of the game on Steam, which is a platform that you can use to download and play games. The change was not The change was not forgotten or invisible to the players. And what this did was it undermined user trust terribly. One principle here that is also something that I believe you're going to find in absolutely everything that we have shared before is how trust is just not non-refundable. Commitment consistency is appreciated and valued by the software users. Second thing that Info did was a fake discount, which was kind of very regular also. Fake discounts were present in this update by offering a bathtub for, let's say, a price tag of 9,999 USD and then scratching it and saying only 10 USD now. These dark patterns are deceptions also erode brand equities. The same as the hyper monetized FOMO tactics, fake discounts are something that users are clever, always clever enough to detect and then not condone. A principle violated here is how Onyx UX is always going to be superior to any conversion hacks. Then the third thing they did was they added outfit pieces after the announcement to inflate pools. So in most gacha games, there is an amount of times that you will be able, that you can only fail to get the character that you wish for until the system reaches something called pity, in which you will forcefully get what you're wishing for. In the case of Infinity Nikki, however, multiple full outfit is broken down in multiple pieces, and therefore players have to make an extra effort than in most gacha averages in order to get a full outfit. Now, pieces were added here for you to complete an outfit, pieces that were not even visible from a UI perspective, like the socks, and this made players very, very, very angry. The translation here is that shifting scope post-purchase is always going to be enraging. Users demand predictability and transparency, and those were the principles violated here. The 70 USD decorative bathtub that I mentioned, it was a bathtub in a game that didn't have a housing system when it came out. So you were going to buy a bathtub that you were not going to be able to place anywhere. So this was truly misaligned monetization. There was no product market fit. There was no game feasibility for this to actually be useful. And the principle violated here is that value has to always be contextual. Last two items very quickly. Well, PS5, PlayStation 5 lookouts. There were unskippable tutorials, and it was a very, very buggy launch. There are YouTube compilations of all the bugs that were found during this version by the users. So in this case, it was all of the above plus high friction and technical unreliability. So there was nothing like a smooth first experience that could actually make a really great first impression for this massive, massive update. Last but not least, what they did was they retconned, which means they updated and changed retroactively the game story without an explanation for the users. So characters that the users like, the characters that made the users feel emotionally invested in the game were no longer there, no longer existed, had been erased from the story, or their backstories were deeply, deeply, deeply modified. So in this case, there was no narrative coherence, and therefore users lost their grounding because they no longer know what context they're moving in, right? One thing to be aware in here is that there is such a thing as a cognitive schema theory. Mental models will collapse with poor continuity. And even on a thing that would seem so superfluous as just pixelated characters on a virtual game can have this kind of consequence. Just a very small snapshot of how the community reacted. There were massive millions of views on several videos on streamers and gamers on how this was probably the worst update ever on a video game in the story of gacha video games. What I'm trying to say is that Infinity Nikki didn't really fail because it was a bad game, because it wasn't. It still isn't a bad game. It failed because the product decisions that were made by the devs, and by the devs I do not mean the engineers, devs are just the team behind the game design, broke the social contract that exists between the players and the developers, right? The social contract is basically that developers respect our time, our money, and our trust. And when trust, clarity, fairness, and progression become just simply nice to haves, then the retention pillar is absolutely destroyed. Okay, thank you so much. That is all for now. Enjoy an AI generated photo of my blood elf riding this mount that I will never drop in World of Warcraft.
Adri, thank you for this great session. It was super, super insightful and it was so enjoyable. Thank you so much for sharing all of these with us. And thank you everyone for listening. Now let's move into the QA section. So let me open that QR code for you. Please head to Slido and submit any questions you have for Adri. While you draft your questions, I'll share a few more slides about product people, but first I will give you about 10 seconds to scan the QR code or copy the code 2806285. Okay, then let me briefly share some information about what product people do. So, in product people, we are typically invited to join teams as interim product managers or product leaders, as product coaches or consultants to upskill product management or operation teams, and to bring expertise to product discovery. And you can see some of the clients we have worked before. And finally, here are some other clients and case stats about our company. We have supported over 690 teams, and there are 40 product leaders and product managers in our team. And we are proud to say that both of our team and leadership are around 60% female. Okay, now I see we already have some questions. Like, let's take a look at what the audience has asked. Why are progress bars, levels, and rewards are so effective in games, and when do they fail in SaaS? What do you think, Adri?
That's a really good question. I think I think when we think of SaaS, I think a lot of the times we assume that the SaaS users don't want to be, I would say, entertained, but in this way, I believe don't want to be delighted or don't care for delightful, fun experiences. SaaS, especially corporate SaaS, in the shape of payroll tools, time clocking, etc. I think there is this perception of the teams behind them that it is not as fun or engaging as a game, and that's perhaps where we're missing out on on an opportunity to gamify or utilize engagement and retention strategies for these users. I think it also happens because most SaaS comes in the shape of a subscription or a payment or a license, and therefore we don't feel like we have to fight engagement and retention so much because it's kind of like a captive user base. However, it's never a bad idea to revisit the design of our user experience and wonder or challenge how we can make it an even better, more delightful experience. And in this case, I think progress bars are something that most SaaS have or are able to implement. And if they don't, then it's something that I usually like to recommend to the teams that I work with.
Yeah, good answer. Thanks for the answer. And we have another question. So, I guess my question is what can SaaS learn from how games introduce complexity over time, leveling, tutorials, etc.?
I think that especially for SaaS that are extremely complex and allow for a lot of customization, it's very important that users are able to tell how much they can do or what the potential of the tool is without being overwhelmed. And that's why I think World of Warcraft does great with their onboarding experiences. World of Warcraft, in the same way, a very complex SaaS tool has too much to do and can be, quite frankly, scary for a new player. In the same way that a very complex taxation tool can be for a brand new auditor or a brand new accountant. So it's very important that we focus on the onboarding experience and the tutorial experience to make the user feel as clever and as autonomous as possible while explaining the extent of the capabilities that they can access. And I think it's probably in the onboarding where we have the better opportunity to either gamify it or apply game design principles to make the experience the most variable. And also because I think a measure of success of how well we did in the onboarding experience is how much users have to come back or raise a ticket or come back to the frequently asked questions, or they don't even engage with certain features, not because the feature doesn't have a value, but because the feature is just not well explained enough, or the tutorial was deficient and didn't expose the capabilities of the feature as well as any other.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for the answer, Adri. And we have another one. How can we apply a fast onboarding or deliver value quickly in B2B corporate where sales and also installing, etc., takes a lot of time?
Oh yeah, the centuries old question. Yes, I mean that's a fair I wouldn't say limitation, but that's a fair trade-off, and that is something that we just have to deal with. I think for the introduction of absolutely any kind of design overhaul or any kind of redesigning of an onboarding experience, it's always going to be at odds with what seems more important and more pressing from a sales and admin or ops perspective. But that's why I think there are ways in which we can quantify the value of a good onboarding experience. Again, if you are able to tie the amount of tickets that you're getting of people that seem to be clueless about how to use your tool, and you manage to reduce them by having a better onboarding, you're going to have happier customers. The account managers are going to have happier customers, and they will feel the reduction on the friction from a customer support standpoint as well. And eventually, I believe it as it happens with almost any transformation process, the team will understand just how fruitful it really is to have a good, delightful onboarding experience.
Yeah, definitely. Agreed. And one more question. If you had to pick one, which one feature from games would you bring to a SaaS product? What do you think would move the needle the most in terms of retention?
Oh wow, that's a really good question. I don't
Yeah,
think it's very hard to pick just one. Um, it's very hard to pick just one feature. I would say that one thing that I particularly like is how social proof can build identity and build retention within a tool. So, for example, if I could have that in Jira, that would be awesome. If I could have like a badge that said how many of my user stories have been completed, and I'm like a Jira pro in my team, that would be amazing. I would love that. I would be boasting my badge to everyone.
really good idea here at Jira. Okay. And one other question. Gamification works through up to a certain point until the users get bored, right? How to avoid this or have a reset or restart?
That's true. That's true. As any kind of I think design framework, it has its limits, of course, right? But that's why I think when you're designing an experience, you don't just base yourself or depend on a single framework. Gamification can ensure, I think, the hook during the onboarding, and it can ensure that users are enabled enough to start using the tool. And it, of course, will depend on just how delightful the rest of the experience is for them. And delightfulness in an experience can be achieved by a different means than gamification. It can be by having a clean UI, a clear UI, a supportive, even a small thing like supported tooltips, an easy chatbot or an easy frequently asked questions section that always continues to enable users. Again, I like to stand behind the principle of users likes to feel clever rather than clueless. And I think for the most part that can be achieved with a level of gamification, but then it will depend on how clever the rest of the features and the rest of the design of experience make them feel as well.
Okay, good answer. Thank you, Adri. And this concludes our QA section. This was our last question. Thank you a lot. Thank you so much for this enjoyable session, insightful session, and all of the answers that you gave to us. I really learned a lot from this session. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If you'd like to stay connected, please scan the QR code on the screen to subscribe to our newsletter for more inspiring product stories and insights. And also, if you enjoyed this talk, please join us again on April 14th next week when we will be talking about pricing and packaging in the AI era. So, thank you for joining and see you next time. And